Meow and welcome to Banned Books Conversations, where radical readers discuss prohibited prose. I'm your host, Tonya Todd, and we're here to talk about banned books, library works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum over the course of Banned Books Week. This series covers 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. Today's book is Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And I should warn you, there may be spoilers ahead. But before we get to that, let's meet today's radical readers. Jennia, please tell us a bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Okay. I am a book editor for fiction and creative nonfiction. I do work from home. I spend a lot of time with my 2 kids in the same room and my 6 pets.
Wow, 6, that's a lot.
It is.
Oksana? We can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm trying to mute to be aware, about the sounds and everything, and then of course I forget. My name is Oksana Marifioti. I am a writer, a writing teacher, and also a book editor.
And Gregory.
Hi, I'm Gregory Kompes. I'm also a writer and a teacher of writing and a new quilter. And I've got a bunch of pets too, but not as many as Jenny.
Yeah, between the 4 of us, we have quite a litter of cats and dogs. So, Gregory, you've served as a panelist for 3 years in a row. What is it about this banned books conversation that interests you?
Well, I think book banning's wrong. I just think it's wrong. I'm a person. I identify as queer and gay, and growing up, there were very few books with people like me on the page. Very few. And I found out there were a bunch of books with people like me on the page. I just wasn't being given access to them. In essence, right? They had not been included in the collections at our libraries. They weren't talked about. I think we want to see ourselves on the page. We want to have our experience in the world and have that mirrored in some way to us, as well as giving us some fun too, right? It isn't also serious either. I mean, books are fun, right? It's fun to read a book and have some escapism. But so when I hear about banning books and when I hear parents pulling books and not letting kids read books, that whole indoctrination of children thing, it scares me because it took me a long time. I was in my 20s before I found gay literature. So they weren't in our bookstores. They weren't. It was a little bit different. We didn't have Amazon then. We didn't have the internet, right? So it was hard to find content. And so now I do what I can, from talking about it to writing queer literature to writing checks for organizations that are doing good works, trying to make sure that books are available. Books should simply be available to people, and that's important to me. So,
Oksana, you're a returning guest also. What is it about the conversation that interests you?
I have some, we all, I'm sure, obviously have personal experiences, but I grew up in the former Soviet Union where, literature was banned for as long as I remember and before me. And I know firsthand what that does to the society and culture as a whole. It is a form of controlling the population, and it's quite insidious and can lead to some very, very bad things happening as a result. So I'm always fascinated with the fact that, I find myself living in a different country, in the country where everybody, as an immigrant, there's this dreamy quality about coming here, and suddenly we are seeing a very similar thing to what I'm familiar with, and it just scares me, frankly.
And Jennia, you're a new guest, and I'm grateful to have you this year. What is it about the conversation that, excited you to the point where you are joining this conversation?
I don't know if excite or interest is the right word so much as concern, because historically, when we've looked at book bans or book burnings, it's never an isolated incident. It's never just about the books. There's always something else happening, or there's some other momentum that is going to be created as a result of this. And so that's what I find scary and dangerous, because we're silencing an idea, a people, a political movement, something, And historically, if we look at these past incidents when this has happened, especially on a larger scale, nothing positive ever comes from it. So for me, it's not even about whether I agree with the material or not, it's whether I agree with what the reasoning is behind that and what traction it can then have as a result of this.
Well, Gregory and Oksana, you may have answered some of the questions in previous episodes, but I think it's worth revisiting the topics for those who maybe didn't catch our discussion or in case your answer has changed. And Oksana, we'll start with you for this one. Have you had an experience with a book that offended you? And if so, how did you respond to that offense?
Not in the same way as our topic here. The only time I was really offended by a book was because I felt as an editor it was very badly written. And I threw it across the room. And it was a romance of some sort. But no, I've never been offended generally by books just because I don't agree with the ideas expressed in it. I just maybe felt bothered or annoyed, but then the next response is that, well, isn't this what's supposed to happen? We're supposed to understand the world from different perspectives, even the ones that we don't agree with. Where else do we find them? Not in the media, not in politics. We find them in books. So I guess the answer is no.
How about you, Gregory?
Yeah, it's really hard to offend me. I mean, like really, really, really hard to offend me. There have been many books I have not liked. There have been books I don't like the themes of, for example. And some of those I have finished reading because I agree with Oksana's concept, right? We need to be exposed to everything. And so therefore, there are times, I read through or finish things that I'm not really that interested in, but I feel like the work is good or the story's good or that I need to have some experience in whatever that realm is where I'm a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes I skip pages of things I'm not really interested in too. But if I don't like something and really don't like it, I'm really turned off for some reason, I just move on to the next book. My to be read list is very tall. I tend not to give bad reviews either, just because I don't like a theme. If a book isn't for me, that doesn't mean it deserves no stars or no comment either. Some books I have not liked and I have not offered reviews. That's one of my ways around some of that too, because I know the writer's doing their topic justice. It's just not something I want to participate in. So I just make, informed the best informed choice I can at any time based on what I'm reading and how much time I have to read. So.
Jennia?
I can't think of a book off the top of my head that has offended me, but like the others have said, there have been some where I disliked it. Maybe I disliked some of what was being said in it. And I usually do the same thing as Gregory, where I just don't even review it. I might not even add it to my Goodreads list or let anyone know that I've read it. But yeah, it's also pretty easy to just say, this isn't for me, and then put it aside and move on. There's no reason for me to force myself through something if I realize that I'm going to object to anything in that book.
Is there a scenario in which you feel banning a book is the correct course of action? And if so, what is it? And we'll start with Gregory.
No, never.
Is that your full answer?
That's my full answer. No.
Full stop, period.
Period. Yeah. There's never a reason to ban a book. If you don't want to read it, don't read it. But books should be available. Content ideas should be available to people.
Oksana?
I'm conflicted about this because I feel like I want to say no, but then there's I guess it depends on what it is. If it's fiction, mainstream fiction, it's just writers sharing ideas. But there have been books written throughout history that have outlined a plan to eradicate a particular culture or a set of people. And I feel like those books can be quite dangerous because they are like textbooks for holocausts or, erasing a group of people, and that they're very clear and direct in their language. So it's not like, let's look at the ideas and interpret them. And, it's literally like, here is a plan. It's a 5-step plan on how to get rid of this particular group of people that does not deserve to live. So I feel like it depends on the book.
So it does. And it makes me wonder, wouldn't it be better to leave those books available so that everyone has that information available and that you can prepare against it, that you can arm yourself to fight against the how-to?
Often those books are not accessible to people who are at the targets of the book. Either they cannot read the language or they don't have access to it. You know, obviously we're talking about books in hopefully the ones that no longer really circulate. But, you know, during the two great wars, they definitely did, and they caused a lot of harm. And I don't really, that's why I said I'm conflicted, because it
Right.
is a book, it is written by people, but what do you do with a book that instigates violence so openly? Because the writer claims that certain people don't deserve to live.
What are your thoughts, Jennia?
I had a similar answer, especially before we had this meeting and going into it, and I started researching it because my knee-jerk reaction was stuff like Holocaust denial literature. Do we really need that? What benefit does it have to make this available to anyone? But then I started reading case studies about countries that have put a ban on it, and they're seeing that it's having the opposite effect of what they were hoping it would have. And so then that makes a case for, well, we might think that we're doing something good or for the better of humanity by blocking this information from becoming available at all. But if we're then seeing that it has the opposite effect, where then people are able to say, well, this is what I believe and this is what happened because there's nothing to counter it, or because this side doesn't exist, so then other side doesn't need to come in and present their arguments against this thing, what do you do? Because I think that's part of it too. If we don't have side A, then there's no reason to have side B right against it. And so we don't have both sides because now no sides are represented.
Anything to add to that, Gregory?
Well, I also think we live in a country that's supposed to have this foundation of vast ideas, and that part of what makes America truly special is that we can see it. Hopefully, this is being challenged right now, but we can see ideas from many points of view, and so I think if we, as Jennia was talking about, if we take one of those points of view out, even if we disagree with it, or even if it's potentially damaging, we're limiting the conversation, and I think the conversation is important. We're not so good at it right now, but we have been in the past, and hopefully we'll return to being good at it. So having multiple points of view available creates greater opportunity, I think.
I just want to add too that this would only work if each side is given a platform to have their view articulated and shared, which of course is not what we're seeing almost anywhere ever, not just now, but throughout history. So we're also operating under this set of ideals that doesn't really exist when we have some of these conversations.
Yeah, very good point. So what is the value in reading books that might be considered offensive by some? And Oksana, you touched on this a little bit, so we'll start with you.
I mean, I definitely feel like it is really important to read outside of our own perspective. There is a field of study in history that focuses on intellectual history, and intellectual history is basically, it claims that if you really want to learn about what happens in a particular time in history in a particular country, you need to read books written by writers, philosophers, sociologists, and not necessarily by historians. So personal narratives, memoirs, you know, things like that, journals will give you actually a much clearer vision of what is going on or what went on at that time in history. And obviously for us to get that clear perspective, we need to read this literature from all kinds of people. So I feel like there is a value in that, because historians ultimately write histories, you know, they're highly revised and edited by somebody other than the historians. You know, they don't just write perspectives that are just solely theirs. They have to, they usually work for institutions of higher learning, and in the past they worked for the monarchs. So they couldn't just write everything, you know.
Yeah.
It was a very particular focused perspective. So it is important to write, to read outside of history to understand actually what is happening in our society.
Jennia, what are your thoughts on why we should read material that is considered offensive by some?
Because we do need to have that broadening of perspectives, and especially if we're going to talk about this with children and school systems, when we talk about this being their formative years, this is also when they're shaping their world views and they're developing empathy, they're learning about other people, and they may be either solidifying or confronting the stereotypes that they've had. And so when they read something that is outside their perspective, it can either be aiding that or it can be having the opposite effect depending on how limited that media is.
Gregory.
Yeah, I think perspective is a great word. I think there's this. I think it's the reason that there's such a big push right now to ban books on the African American experience and the queer experience. And I mean, those are the books that are being literally burned, dumped by the truckloads, being taken out of the system. And I think it's the idea that if the parents get to take the literature away, if the government gets to take the literature away, then those things no longer exist, whatever those perspectives are. And I think that one of the true benefits of reading banned literature is opening yourself up to other ideas and other perspectives and other possibilities, both to see yourself on the page, but to see others on the page. There's also, I wish I could remember the quote, but there's a quote by Stephen King who says, when books are banned, those are the books you should read, geared toward young people. And I think it's really true. I think if someone wants to take an idea away, that's an idea that should be consumed, to see why it matters. And so I think that's one of the really strong reasons to lean into reading banned books, just to find out what the big deal is, what's being taken away.
Yeah, I've seen that quote, and it's essentially, there's something in here that people don't want you to know. So find out what that is.
What that is, yeah. Yeah.
Well, and even to form your own opinions, because some of these bans are being instigated by one person or a handful of people. But the people then who are insisting on it and adding their names haven't read the books. So they don't actually know. They're taking one line, for instance, and pulling it out of context, which, as we know, you can do with just about everything.
Yeah.
And so shouldn't you want to have an informed opinion about what you're voting against or what you're rallying against?
Right.
Yeah. The new law in Utah that's just gone into effect gives an immense amount of power to a few people, because if something has been banned in one or two communities, they ban it statewide now. That it's just that's it. So a very conservative community has much more power now than anybody else. And once it's off the shelf, there's no review process. It's just gone. Yeah, it's really disturbing, right? So,
and I think everyone should be afraid of that, because no matter what your political or religious beliefs, as soon as one district shows that this is a possibility, that means it could happen anywhere. So you might be on the opposite side now and support it because you don't like this particular book. But then what if it turns around and you're in another circumstance where now it's material that you'd like your children to have access to that is being banned?
And the law is already in place. It's already established that this can be removed without your input. Yeah, very good point. So as Gregory has mentioned, in recent years, there's been a pattern in the themes that get books banned. And Jennia, what do you think this pattern says about where we are as a society?
So going back to that historical perspective, there's always something else going on. So it might have been like, in Germany in the 30s, we're seeing works by people who are Marxists or Jewish are being destroyed. We don't want to have their voice heard. We go back, I think we were talking earlier about ancient Mayans. We had some of those original people coming in from Europe. They destroyed a lot of the cuneiforms and other things that were found in ancient Mayan civilization. And now, when I was looking up statistics on this, it was something like the number of Black women authors is just so grossly overrepresented within the books that are being banned, especially then when you look at what that number is as a whole in the publishing industry. So that number is actually much more, it's just astronomical compared to the number that you'd think it would be if we were going to be looking at this divided up by what they're actually represented with in the whole publishing industry.
Right.
So there's something here, and all I can think about is social change, and we don't want that social change. And when I say we, I just mean this pocket little handful of people who are banning the books. I can't really say why, because most of the information that they give is vague. I don't like the content. It's offensive. But what does that mean? And so it's hard to really put an answer on it because we're not being given enough information to really give an answer, apart from I find it objectionable.
What are your thoughts, Gregory?
Yeah, I watch, I mean, I live in the South right now. I'm a transplant down here for circumstance, and being in the middle of it and seeing this incredible level of prejudice that gives an immense amount of power to a small handful of people. You know, I think back to my childhood in the 70s and the 80s, early 80s, and growing up and going to school and not even thinking about these things. There was I talked about earlier, right? I mean, there wasn't queer literature on the shelves. So there was censorship happening. There was, in essence, banning of books from high school, from community libraries, from things. But we didn't hear about it. So at least we're talking about it now. But I think that there's an immense amount of power for a very small handful of people. I can only hope, I do have hope for the future. I can only hope that the pendulum will swing in a very dramatic way. The younger generation they're trying to protect. I don't use air quotes very often, but this is a time for that. I think that generation and the generation that's just a little bit older than them are much more open to ideas than their parents and to the people that are working so hard to ban books. So I think access to content is going to continue, and because of the internet, because of information, there's a much bigger and broader conversation that we're seeing these things happen. They're abhorrent, but at least we're seeing it in a way that maybe in the 70s we wouldn't have seen it in America, right? It was still happening. It isn't like this is something new, right? So prejudice has always existed in our country. I think it's probably always existed in humanity. Right. So this isn't new, but the fact that we can have conversations about it, the fact that there's a series on banned books, the fact that there are lists, the fact that there are librarians trying to make sure banned books are on their shelves. There's just, the conversation is very big. We get a bit myopic at times, but I think the conversation is broad in a way that is fabulous, right? I hate what's happening, but at least people are talking about it.
And fighting against it.
And fighting against it, right? Absolutely.
Oksana.
You know, I think that at the core of the reasoning behind banning a specific a group from having a voice really stems from lack of emotional intelligence and critical thinking skills. As a teacher, you know, I teach at a university here. I agree with Gregory. I see younger people coming into the classroom, and I often feel like they're so much more intelligent than people my age. Some people my age that I know that I can't really talk to. I don't understand how to talk about some of the simplest. It could be a very simple thing, a topic, and somebody my age cannot understand how to approach it without being offensive or biased or racist or sexist. It's like, you know, or xenophobic or any of those things. And I feel like at the core of it, I mean, I've always believed that, and I always tell people this, is that it's the way we teach our young that is going to determine our future. It is always what determines our future. And unfortunately, these, you know, older generations, for a variety of reasons, do not give a lot of value to their emotional intelligence, levels of empathy. And so, you know, Gregory mentioned prejudice and how that's probably always been part of humanity, which it seems like it's true. I think the opposite of prejudice, what can kind of offset prejudice, is emotional intelligence. How do you deal with things that you don't necessarily feel that you align with? You know, and how do you deal with that without your answer being that needs to disappear? I don't like it. It does not align with what I believe in, because a belief is a very subjective thing. And it seems like people who are on this bandwagon feel like a belief is an absolute truth. And if you go through an English comm class, you learn that it's not, you know what I mean? It's just basic education. It's like the bottom level of college education. And I understand not everybody has access to it, but it's important, I feel like, for teachers, especially now, to implement these types of lessons into their classrooms from the very beginning, very young age. Empathy, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, all of these practices we need those things and we're just not giving those things. And I feel like we see what happens to a person who is not developed in that way in these small groups of individuals who decide they're going to ban something because it does not align with what they believe is right.
So book bans are only one of the many freedoms that are under attack in our country right now. Gregory, why is it important that we continue this particular fight?
Well, piggybacking on what Oksana talked about a little bit, I think there needs to be space for ideas. There just simply needs to be space for a diversity of ideas and belief systems. And we need to keep working and doing what we can to create that space for diversity. It's our job as educators, as writers, as human beings. I think it's our job to make space for other ideas, for other thoughts, for other voices. I just think it's our job. I work currently for Southern New Hampshire University, who has taken a very strong stand on DEI. Matter of fact, they've extended it to DEIB, right? So they've added belonging to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They've taken a stand, and I see what's happening every once in a while. I'll have a student come through a class who wants to not do an assignment because the reading is offensive to them. And our university does not make exceptions. Some universities say, well, then you can read this instead. And our university is like, no, it's a master's program after all. You should be exposed to these ideas. Or not do the assignment and lose the points. I mean, those are your choices as a student, right, in the program. And that has the support of the administration. And I think this idea of people taking a stand as individuals, but also as societal institutions. And where do we fall on that? Somebody somewhere along the way has to say enough, or push back enough to make a bit of room and have a slightly different conversation. So I like that I work somewhere that at the moment has truly dug in, right? They've taken a stand, and this is part of their philosophy and their mission. And therefore, they're exposing people to ideas. And I think when it comes to education, that's how it should work. I think that idea of the liberal education, right? The idea that you're exposed to all kinds of ideas and you get to make choices on your own as a human being. I think that's something worth fighting for. It's an ideal, absolutely, but I think a lot of things are ideals that are worth fighting for.
Oksana.
I feel like if we don't expose people to various ideas, like Gregory was saying, then we have a society that feels like somebody has the right idea and they just need to follow whoever that is. And that's really dangerous. That leads to, authoritarianism and terrorism in many different forms throughout history, where the population is taught that this is one right way of living a life. We're going to teach you what this way is, right? Because we know better. I mean, in former Soviet Union, when the Bolsheviks took over after 1918, one of the first things they did was create a new education censorship bureau, which was headed by Lenin's wife. And what they did was rewrite every textbook, every book of literature, including fairy tales, to align with the right idea. And so when I tell my mom that, and my aunt who grew up there, they had no idea. They didn't know that they were writing fairy tales that were revised and edited. They thought these were things that came to us from hundreds of years ago, and they have these lessons. So it can really be quite dangerous. It's literally a tunnel into a very specific type of censored and controlled society. And I feel like if we don't find ways to battle that right now, that's where we're headed.
Jennia.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said so far, because I think people also need to stop being short-sighted when they think it's going to stop here and this is all that it is. And they need to look at the long-term effects and not just on the people who are putting those bans in place who might have that momentary win or what they see as a momentary win, but even the psychological effects on educators, librarians, and then the children who grew up in this environment. So So often when we do this, it then becomes a place of fear. Do I want to speak out? Do I not want to speak out? Do I want to risk losing my job because I put this book on the shelf anyway? And when we study the psychological effects of living in that type of environment, no matter what the causes of it, we see these drastic increases in anxiety and depression and a lack of self-worth. And that has, psychosomatic symptoms as well that are going to come across. And is that really what we want? Because then too, you're saying these are the people I still trust to be with my children every single day. But also think about what those types of effects have with parents who are rearing children at home. We want those people to have an environment where they're able to feel safe and calm, but we're not asking the same of our educators and our librarians. And so there also is some hypocrisy there, but I don't think that's really being identified or talked about either. But it is going to be an effect that we see over time if this is allowed to continue.
Thank you for
But
that.
I also want to talk about the children too, because again, so my background is I have a master's in developmental psychology, so it bothers me on that aspect as well. Because every time that we see children raised in this little bubble, they don't really have the appropriate view of what the world is like. They don't have the mental equipment to go out in the world and even be faced with these ideas that are counter to what they've been led to believe. They tend to respond with anger or some other defense mechanism because they also haven't really developed critical thinking. And it's also harder to develop emotional maturity if everything surrounding you is backing up what you've been led to believe your entire life. Everything is a little check mark. Yes, this is the way it is. Yes, this is the way it is. And you're having everything confirmed for you nonstop. But then you leave that bubble, so you go to another country, they get a job somewhere else. And now they realize that everything they've learned isn't necessarily true. And just on a smaller scale, it's sort of like when we talk about in third grade, we might learn this aspect of history. Then you get to fifth grade and you realize maybe that wasn't entirely the accurate viewpoint, but you're allowed to take that stepladder approach so that you can work through it and adjust your mindset rather than just be thrown into it with no mental resources for how to take in all this information and adapt to it.
Yeah, all very excellent points. Does anyone have anything to add before we move on to today's book? All right, well, let's talk about Parable of the Sower. It's a speculative fiction set in post-apocalyptic Earth, heavily affected by climate change and social inequality. With the world descending into madness and anarchy, one young woman, blessed or cursed with hyperempathy, begins a fateful journey toward a better future. Parable of the Sower won the 1994 New York Times Notable Book of the Year Award and has been adapted into an opera and a graphic novel. In 2021, it was picked by New York Times readers as the top science fiction nomination for Best Book of the last 125 years. And I have to say, when I read this, because of the timeline, I started reading it, I think, in July of 2024, and that's where the novel starts. So it was just kind of chilling, really realizing, oh, I'm going through these dates with the character. So, Jennia, what compelled you to choose this book among the options in this year's Banned Books conversation?
I wanted to pick one that I hadn't read already because I would have already had ideas formed about it. So I wanted to go in completely fresh.
Yeah, great idea. How about you, Gregory? The last few years, you've been not given, but you've chosen books that maybe confront something that does not interest you. You had a graphic novel the first year. You're not really interested in those. You had a book about violence last year. And now we have a book about religion, which is also not really a high point for you. So what made
Yeah,
you
although
choose this
I
book?
have to admit, I like people exploring religion. I've been exploring religion pretty much my whole life and trying to find a place to fit in, right? Having been raised in a religious family and then having them say you don't belong here because of who you are. So I mean, spirituality has always been part of my life. It's just finding somewhere to fit in. And so I like the idea that the character is creating something. Potentially, although I don't agree with what the character created. But anyway, that's irrelevant. That's okay, right? But choosing this book, I love Octavia Butler. I have for a long time, and I love the flaws in her novels because I think all of her novels are flawed, and so that's really enjoyable. And like Jennia, this was a book on the list I had not ever read before, and I wanted to come in fresh. And like you, was like, oh, how chilling is this that we're like right in the timeline at the beginning of the novel, and And on some level, these conversations we're having now about climate change and power and other things are, I love science fiction when it predicts the future, but I mean, we're having these conversations now. We're living through some stages of this. So all of those things came together to make for an interesting read, for a reason to read a book, I think.
And Oksana, why did you choose this book?
Well, it's one of my favorite books and one of my favorite authors. One of my cat's name is Octavia. So enough said. So yes, I was a bit more familiar with this book going in.
So what do you think made this book polarizing to the point of being banned, Oksana?
The ideas on philosophy and religion, of course. I mean, it kind of, if you have a very strong belief system and you read this book, it might rub you the wrong way in many different places. And, it might not, obviously, if it's banned, that means you're not questioning it necessarily. You're not questioning your belief system. You're questioning the value of what this writer has to say and maybe feeling like they are challenging you on a level that you're not comfortable with. But more importantly, I'm trying to get into the heads of the people who are doing the banning, because it's never the kids, right? So if I'm the one doing the banning, I'm thinking, okay, I understand that this person is full of it and doesn't know what they're talking about, right? The kids might not understand it. And I don't want a kid reading this and saying God is trickster, teacher, chaos, clay, and then come to me and say, what does this mean? I really like that. Can you explain it? I don't want somebody to question what is standard and 100% absolute truth to me. That's how I feel about it.
Jennia.
I did think of that, and also perhaps some of the violent incidents that are depicted, although they do fit in well with the world building. But I can see that being something where a parent or a teacher might think that it doesn't have literary value, or if they take an isolated incident from this book, not looking at the book holistically. If they're just taking this one isolated paragraph, for instance, and reading it on its own out of context, I could see someone maybe thinking oh, this is glorifying this or it's glorifying that. But again, it's because they don't have that full understanding. They're just looking at this one little section. And that's something I have seen come up on banned book lists for why this is included. But at the same time, I've also thought, right, but we have, The Walking Dead on TV, all these other similar TV shows and books, and those are not being put on these lists. I don't see The Road on there, for instance. But anyway.
Not that we're condoning adding things, it's just considering reasoning.
No, it's just going back to that earlier question about why these authors, why these books,
yes,
why similar material is allowed to exist and stay on the shelves without having any pushback. But then this becomes the one that we hold up as an example of, oh, this is what we shouldn't expose our children to.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts, Gregory?
Black queer author. I think that's a big part of it, frankly. That's why this book, I think, shows up. I think the idea of agency, right? Young people having agency, making choices, exploring religion, realizing things don't work the way they are, and therefore striking out to attempt to change them. I think all of those things are incredibly challenging to people who want others to live in a certain way. The idea of questioning authority is huge. I mean, I just think that's huge. You can't create this religious bubble, which is really where we are, right? These far right extremists who want people to live their way only, right? I think it's, well, I read this right before it. I read the YA novel Ban This Book, which is banned, right? Which of course the author probably knew it would be banned. But it's it's the same conversation, right? It's that idea of young people questioning authority and striking out on their own. And I think that's at the core of this book, right? So it's a young
challenges the patriarchy too, because she becomes the leader.
Absolutely, right. So yeah, I think all of those things, and there's a bit of sex and there's a bit of other stuff too, but in the end, I think it's that idea of a woman challenging authority in in an authoritarian society, I think is pretty strong.
So of all the books that I've covered in this series the last 3 years, this has been the toughest to find a specific reason that it was banned. It's just the language around it has been so general. most recently, it was part of a massive book ban in Texas high schools where the main reason for removal was a vague labeling of just not appropriate for the age group. Like, but with no age listed, just just not appropriate for the age group.
Yeah, I think I saw something similar. It was inappropriate content for whatever, but it was just that label, inappropriate content. There was nothing describing what made that content inappropriate, why it would be considered inappropriate, why there's no leeway given for discussion so that you can talk about this inappropriate content. It was
You
just
can't really
that
counter
label.
it if you don't have the information. Like, which content are you saying is not appropriate? And it doesn't say anything around it. And I don't think that's an accident.
Some of the keywords I saw floating around was too much racism, too much classicism shown, which is, they basically attach that to everything that's around majority of these narratives. Like we don't need to talk so much about racism or any kind of phobias against other groups of people. Like enough is enough, right? I feel like that's what's going on right now. Everybody's saying that it's like we talk too much about these things and they're all in your face and it's just very tiring and it's disturbing for the kids. And so we're going to put all of these books in this one pile and treat it as one problem.
Yeah. And the idea with that is we don't want our children to have any empathy toward other people. So they need to, so those books need to go.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, feels like that's what
yeah,
and
it's like
language. All of it's coded language. They don't,
yeah.
It's very rare for there to be incredibly specific, right? They can be vague now.
And it's like people with lack of empathy are trying to teach other people how to not have empathy. It's just this ongoing cycle that somebody's trying to reintroduce. And, I feel like younger people are resisting that nowadays a lot more than they did in the past, because this happened in the past.
Gregory, last year you said something about indoctrination that I was hoping you would repeat this year, about how the reasons being given for why some of the things are being banned is because they don't want their children being indoctrinated into certain points of view. But you had a counter to that. Are you willing to share that again?
I don't know exactly what I said last year, but the idea in my head has not changed. So I might get close to it. But the idea that they're indoctrinating their children in a very specific way, and they don't want their children exposed to other ideas. So they flip that around and say that the other ideas are indoctrinating, as opposed to enlightening, and I just recently had an argument with a parent, right, about this idea of allowing young people to find content outside of the indoctrination that they're going through. How important that is. As a queer person, that was incredibly important for me to discover was not the only one, because their goal had been achieved. I really did believe that I was outside the norm, that there wasn't any literature because I was the only person who felt this way. I mean, as a young person, I really believed that for a long time, which did a lot of emotional damage for me to have to work through for years of therapy and other fun stuff. So it is that idea of the reversal, right? So often these groups point fingers in a way that actually tell you exactly what their message is for themselves. They flip it over. The idea that queer literature would indoctrinate young people into being queer is just ridiculous, right? Those in psychology know it doesn't work that way.
Right.
But of course, they don't want their indoctrination to be undermined. And I think that's probably one of the reasons this book is potentially a challenge, right? Because a young person does create something new from a religious standpoint.
And I feel like these are the same people who say things like, well, I don't know any queer people, so there must not be that many. And it's like, A, you know me, so you know one. And B, it's probably just they don't feel comfortable sharing it with you. They don't feel safe enough to let you in on that. But trust me, you know queer people. It's inescapable. We exist. We're everywhere. And we don't always present as queer,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if there's fear, then it's going to happen, right? Because I mean, I come I'm a mixed ethnicity, and Roma is one of my ethnicities. And in most of Europe, Roma authors are censored from publishing books in mainstream publishing. You just can't. If you have Roma narratives or you present yourself as a Roma author, chances are you're not going to get published unless you're self-publishing. And so, you know, people in that community, kids grow up thinking that they can't really do anything, that are nobodies. And that's a very, very dangerous mental and emotional space to be in, because it can last a lifetime and destroy a person. And there's so many people like that around the world because of censorship, because of inability to voice, you know, your opinions, your ideas, you know. And yeah, books like these question a lot of things, and you just, you know, people in control don't want people who are not mainstream acceptable material to question too many things either.
Oksana, you said that you read this book before preparing for this panel. So just guide us through what it is you like about this book, or what are the things that interest you in this book? What was your reaction as a reader?
Well, I really enjoyed first of all, the writing style itself. You know, sometimes you'll read a book and it's kind of like you have fast food, and sometimes you read a book and it's like the meal that you want to kind of savor for a long time. And the latter is how I felt when I was reading this. So the style really appealed to me. And what also appealed to me is that this is a young person questioning a lot of things and not afraid to find her own way. And I felt a connection with this protagonist, because I feel like when I was a teenager, I was questioning a lot of things and getting in a lot of trouble. And still, when I think about my younger self, I think about her as if it's like a different person. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. And I really respect that person, because I feel like I was standing up for more of what was important to me than I do even now. You know, where now I've become a little bit more careful and maybe it's not worth it, you know. So this really resonated with me. And the fact that I didn't see it as a religious book. I saw it as a book of philosophy, because a lot of things that Butler talks about to me sounded like Eastern philosophy, older wisdoms, not Western culturally. And so I'm always drawn to to Eastern thought just generally, not necessarily Buddhism, but just as a whole thing. And so when I was reading this, I was like, you know what, this is really interesting that a young person like this would think in this way about the world and have these thoughts about what could help. You know, it's a very empathetic protagonist towards what could make the world maybe better. She might be wrong, right? I mean, we often have these characters who have the best of intentions. And I feel like it's kind of leading to that towards the end a little bit, where it's almost like, she doesn't know where she's going yet, you know, but she's trying so hard to make the world bearable. And I think that's what resonated the most.
And what was your reader reaction, Gregory? This was your first time reading it. You said that you thought it was a flawed novel, but it also seemed like there were some elements that you enjoyed.
Yeah, I do. Well, like I said, I think most novels are flawed, to be fair. It isn't just Octavia Butler's. I mean, I think most of my novels are flawed too. I think most novels are flawed because you can only accomplish so much on the page. But I enjoyed the journey, actually. Not even knowing what I was getting into, frankly. I didn't read anything. I did something you would do, which is I picked up a book not knowing anything really about it except who the author was. And so I went in very blind. And so I was surprised by some of the ideas that were being explored, especially because I love all of the body shifter kind of novels that Butler has written, right? So I love all of that kind of vampire-y kind of stuff that she's written. So this was kind of a bit of a surprise to me, because these were kind of regular humans in an extreme situation. And so I liked that. And I liked the dystopia journey. I liked that it was a young woman protagonist taking the journey, because I don't think we see enough of that in general. And then I like the fact that she challenges a lot. I'm not a fan of where the book ends up. And I do think it's the narrator has a bit of a flawed expectation of the world, but also a young idealistic, right? I think when we're young, Oksana's very much hit that nail on the head. I think when we're young, we take chances and risks, and we're hopefully more outspoken and we're more idealistic. And the older we get, we want to make sure we have our 401k in place and our mortgages paid. So it's a very different set of goals, right? When you're older than when you're 17 years old, right? Heading out into the world for the first time. So I like that. I like the road concept. I liked someone brought up, it might have been Oksana, but it might have been Jennia, the idea of the road, Cormac McCarthy's novel being brought up. Because I think there's a parallel in some ways of these two novels. I think it would make a great paper to look at these two novels side by side and explore the concepts within them, and the hope, and then the idea that it's a young male and a young female. I think that would also be interesting. So there's so much good stuff going on, and this has a definite place in the dystopic realm of literature, I think. And it's Octavia Butler, who's rather brilliant. So there's that too. Right. I mean, the language choices and the world building and some of those things are really, really lovely. So.
And it was Jennia. What was your reader reaction going through this for the first time?
I agree. She might have had a flawed perspective, but I think that works in the book's favor because she is starting out a 15-year-old girl. And like others have touched on, how many of us have a real idea of not just the world, but even who we are at that point in our lives? We're figuring it out. So she does really have that coming of age trope in there too. It's just in a very harsh environment because we do see her picking apart. Here's what I've been told is what I should be. Here's what I've been told my expectations for the future are, or what I should follow. And then she goes against that and she works out what matters to her and what she'd rather see her future like. So for instance, when she's talking to Curtis about getting married, and then, you know what, maybe not. Or when her friend leaves and goes to the organization. So we see her going through all of that. And again, it really is a coming of age trope. It's just very, very different circumstances from what we would expect in contemporary fiction. But it's all there. And so I really enjoyed that part of it too, because, being able to pick out these elements that serve a young adult novel, no matter what the genre is, and seeing it in place here, and then how it's effectively utilized within this space. But I also really loved that everything she does, and I saw someone sum this up in a line, they said that she acts, she doesn't just react. And I think that really sums up her character, because even in the beginning with her friend Joanne, she's showing her the book and saying, just in case. It's never, you should do this, or I think this is the way to do it, or I like this idea. She's always looking ahead and finding a way to try and accomplish that, even when she receives pushback from all these other people. So she's not just, and that goes back to something I think Gregory said about a teen with agency. She's not just allowing these things to happen to her and then reacting to them. We're not seeing her write in her diary about her feelings and what it means to her, why she's upset, why this hurt, why this was terrible. She's actually doing something to instigate change.
And the writing in the diary is a log, this is our history and I am recording how it happened.
And I think that I don't think her being this young person in a novel is by chance. I feel like, when you read a book at different ages in your life, you will perceive it differently depending on your experience, right? And I feel like here, the lesson is that this young protagonist who is full of wonder and hope, but yet wisdom, is what we all need to survive ultimately. Because we cannot be stuck in a mindset of, and I'm going to generalize here, somebody who's a bit older, set in their ways, no longer wants to question anything, knows all the answers. And when they make mistakes, they can't deal with those mistakes, right? We can't be stuck in that mindset. The young people have survived, all of us as young people have survived more usually than we will in the entirety of the rest of our lives. Think about even just the process of learning how to walk. Can you imagine doing that as an adult, like an older adult, and how just full of anxiety we would all be, And I feel like this character shows us, it's like lessons being taught. Here is a dystopian world. Here is everything at its end. In order for us to survive, we need to have a mindset of somebody who is willing to keep trying, maybe a little bit idealistic, willing to make mistakes, but can still go and accept people from different walks of life and protect themselves if they need to, but also learn. So it is really interesting the way that it's set, because it could have been an older adult person who's somewhat of a prophet and is smart. That's what we usually see, right? Usually a cis male who has had hard experiences in younger years, and now they know and they can lead. But we have this young girl, right, leading, who doesn't know, and she knows she doesn't know. She knows some things, or feels she does, and then others she's questioning. And to me, that's the most resonating lesson here, is that I always try to remember that myself. When I'm stuck in life, I'm like, how were you when you were 18? How resilient were you back then? Can you bring some of that back?
I feel like that is a brilliant answer to a question I haven't asked yet, Oksana. No, it's great.
Telepathically connecting here.
Yes. Not the first time, and I hope not the last time. So my question is, what are the reasons that people should read this book, and what are the conversations that can start? And I feel like you offered so much in that there, but I want to make sure you have an opportunity to answer that specifically in case there's anything more you want to share.
You know what? I do feel like I've answered it. I don't want to keep going. No,
it's okay. Like your answer is like, yeah, that's exactly the answer right there. What are your thoughts on this, Gregory?
I loved Oksana's answer. I agree with it wholeheartedly. I also, as you were talking, I couldn't help but think about The Handmaid's Tale, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which is told from that little bit older character's perspective. It's told as what has happened, as opposed to going through on the journey with the character like this book. So it's a very different, so often we get the survivor at the end, looking back at how they survived, as opposed to being in the moment. So I think that idea of a young person living in the moment, moving forward with ideals, whatever those are, I think it's a great takeaway, and a great conversation. And I don't feel like we give young people the opportunity to talk about their ideals and where they want to head enough. I work with people who are a little bit older than that, but still it's that idea of that talking about ideals and having different beliefs and having different concepts of what the future could be like. And they exist because they do for young people, right? They view what's coming for them in the future, and they envision themselves in that place, working toward it. And we're just not giving them a place to maybe play and explore, at least that I'm part of. I should say that. I mean, I'm sure that's happening someplace, but we don't see it. So I think this book is great for that conversation. I think it's, where do you see yourself in the future? How do you see yourself changing the world? How do you see yourself surviving? I think those are great questions to have for young people, and I'll give them a safe space to explore those ideas.
And Jenny, I do want to get your answer to this, but he has inspired another question that I need to ask the two of them. You're both writers. How do you feel like you learned anything as an author reading this book? And I ask specifically because there are so many elements that are introduced that don't get wrapped up in a nice, neat bow. I mean, there are disappearances that never get resolved. There are questions that never get answered. There are people that are in her life and they leave, and it feels like they might come back again at some point, but they don't. We just don't get those ribbon answers, that are just wrapped up in, oh yes, and that was planted here so that they could come in here and save the day here, or, and that parallels this thing that was set up in the first portion of the book. It isn't like that. It's harsh, and it feels more like reality because, yeah, sometimes people are just gone and you don't get an answer to what happened. So as an author, how did that make you, did you learn anything or take anything away from that in terms of maybe you don't have to wrap up every storyline in your novels?
I think from a literary fiction standpoint, that works, which is also really interesting because this is sci-fi, which wouldn't be considered literary in most circles, but I do find this to be a literary novel. personally. I just do. And part of it's because of that the journey. I think that the bows not being tied create a reality, and that's unique and different and special. I also found myself wondering as a writer. I found myself wondering if Octavia Butler pantsed this novel. I really did wonder if the first draft was really pantsed out as opposed to being thoughtfully planned. Um, she does both, so it's she's talked about that in some of her interviews and things. So I just sort of wonder, what her construction process was. Although I didn't do any research to see if I could find that out. But I think this is about voice. I also think this is an incredibly unreliable narrator, and so we have to. She's a young person, right? Incredibly unreliable narrator. So we have to take that too. There are big gaps in the story. There's big gaps that happen. What the narrator has decided is important and what they don't think is important enough to share. All of those things. So there were lots of choices were made, as the phrase goes, and so that's really obvious too. So I love all of that. I think we're so informed by reading the work of others, just so informed. So there's lots of takeaways, I think.
Oksana?
And I agree about the voice. I think the voice carries the novel, which does make it, in my opinion, a literary novel. And I didn't really care. I was just going along with the main character, with Lauren. I liked what she had to say, and I really enjoyed the journey structure of the story as well. I often read journeys in rough drafts that I edit, and often they lack tension. It's just kind of like wandering. The characters are just wandering through the landscape. In fact, one of the most, I guess, popular TV shows, The Witcher, which is based on books, the books were like that. It was just a journey. There was nothing going on. He goes somewhere, fights someone, then he goes somewhere else, fights somebody else. And, but her journey just had just enough conflict between all of these bubbling connections with different people to keep going. But at the root of it, for me, it was the voice. I didn't notice the other stuff that much, and it didn't
Wasn't
really.
The Witcher a game first, though? And maybe that's
It
why.
was a game, yeah, and it was really huge. I think the author was Polish, and I read it in a translation, and it was okay because it was like, I was kind of like, where's this character going? Like, they're not doing anything. They're just
Right,
going
just
from one place.
quests, that's it.
But some of the older fairy tales were written in that structure, and they worked for the genre of the fairy tale. And here she does have this kind of a meandering, wandering, after she leaves the compound, obviously. But it worked, I think, for me because she was just as a character. The character was a good storyteller.
Yes, very much so. And I am wondering too whether it was a plotted novel or pantsed, because I think it was supposed to be a series that didn't get finished. But
Maybe. There's
I
a second one, and I think there are only two, right?
There was meant to be a third.
Okay. That makes sense.
So it's a good question and something to research. So now we are back to you, Jennia. What are the reasons that people should read this book, and what are the conversations that can start?
I think that the main character demonstrates the use of a lot of the concepts that we've talked about throughout, such as critical thinking, because we do see her using her critical thinking skills a little more strongly than most of the people around her, but then it leads to her survival. So we're seeing, again, with that whole show don't tell thing, we're seeing that critical thinking really can be what saves you under certain circumstances. And even though there are all these heavier topics throughout, there is violence, it does seem like everything is collapsing around her, there's always that element of hope as well. She never just decides, okay, I give up, this is it. She's always moving on. But one thing too that I appreciated about it, especially as a parent, is that she keeps her set of values throughout. She'll say, I'm going to kill under these circumstances. I'll steal from this person, but I'm not going to steal from that person. I'm going to go and help these people, even when other people have elected not to help them, and to continue wandering by, even though you can hear them screaming for help. And so I think that's something too that also goes against why you should ban it, because she does demonstrate all of these different skills and abilities throughout, while still maintaining that sense of who she is and not compromising on her values and her morals.
Well,
And
thank
actually,
you. Go ahead.
Can I add one more thing? I just
Yes.
remembered something that I was thinking about earlier. So the book is written as a set of journal entries, which makes it a book that didn't really happen. The story doesn't actually happen. It is her perception of what happens. And I really love that setup because she is unreliable. There's all this stuff going on around her, the violence and the mistakes and all of that, but it's only from how she perceives it happening. And I thought that part was really brilliant.
Yes. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? All right. Well, thank you all very much for sharing your perspectives and your input. I really enjoyed this conversation. Gregory, where can people find you and support your work?
My website, which is a work in progress again, is GregoryAKompes.com. And I'm also on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram. Amazon, look up Kompes. I'm one of the few. There aren't too many of us on the planet, which is nice. So just do that. I have a couple of sci-fi novels, a couple of queer fiction. I have a Broadway series. I have a couple of steampunk novels, lots of stuff to read. So.
Will you spell your last name so people aren't looking up?
Sure, it's Kompes.
Thank you. And Oksana, where can people find you and support your work?
OksanaMarifioti.com. So OksanaMarifioti.com, and then all over social media platforms.
And Jennia? My website is jenniaedits.com, JENNIA, and then just edits.com. I'm also on social media, mostly Instagram and Facebook, and I also host the Writing and Editing podcast.
Which is how we met.
Yes, it is.
Well, thank you all again. That's it for today's conversation. If you enjoyed what you heard, please like, comment, and share. Thank you for listening, and more importantly, thank you for reading.